Hello, I'm Ayi Makaraig. Welcome to Rappler Talk. Singaporeans went to the polls on Friday with a massive swing back to the ruling party of Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. The People's Action Party, or PAP, scores its highest vote share since 2001, just months after the death of its stalwart founding father Lee Kuan Yew. The landslide victory dampened hopes Singapore will soon shift to a two-party system. Was the stunning victory the result of a Lee Kuan Yew effect? How does it shape the future of Southeast Asia's economic powerhouse? Today, we talk to Dr. Jillian Kaw, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies at Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. She joins us from Singapore via Skype. Hello, Dr. Kaw.
Hi there.
Hi. So, wow, the results of the Singapore elections, it seems the pundits, all the observers didn't see this coming, didn't see such a landslide victory for the PAP. What exactly explains the results?
Well, yeah, you're right. It's completely unexpected. There were massive turnouts at opposition rallies. A lot of the exchange on social media was what was generated by opposition politicians and quite supportive tone of netizens towards the opposition movement. So this is quite a surprise. I think that, while we're going to wait to do some scientific study on what shaped votes, I think there are three things that we can think about in terms of what might have explained the swing. The first one is, of course, the government's policy record since the last very, very controversial election in 2011.
Right.
So what the government did was to sort of dial down on what was considered an all too liberal foreign labor policy, immigration policy. It also shifted its policies to the left in terms of social safety nets, in terms of, tempering the effects of the market so that we address, income inequalities and people's sense of social security. And also, the government providing more subsidies to bring down the cost of living, especially in the basic essentials, that's housing, healthcare. So policy record. Second, I would say that it has to do with the tactical aspects of running an election. The PAP government has the prerogative, the Prime Minister has the prerogative of setting the time and date of the election.
And just 9 days to campaign, right?
Right. So as you mentioned, it's not just the process of the hustings, but really picking it for the special Golden Jubilee year for Singapore. But it, of course, came, a few months after the passing of the founding Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew. So that memorializing of the journey that Singaporeans and the country has gone through over the past 50 years would really be a reminder to Singaporeans about what the PAP government has taken Singapore through, and also hold out the prospect of how it can continue to provide a few things: efficient government, one that's long-sighted, long-term focused, one that is a good trustee or steward of the country, certainly one that's clean and honest, which is a real value proposition for not just voters in Singapore, but voters everywhere.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it's to some extent the timing, but remember that we're also in the backdrop where the gray clouds on the global economic horizon. We have some geopolitical uncertainty in our region. And the Prime Minister also reminded voters at a huge rally in the city about the impact of political disruptions in neighboring countries. So, that's sort of about the timing issue, and nothing that the opposition politicians could do about it. But they actually anticipated that the People's Action Party might call the election this year, and there was some parties that were better prepared for that. Others, yeah. I think the third factor is really about the track record of the opposition. We have a leading opposition party. It's called the Workers' Party.
Right.
And at the end of the last parliamentary session, they had seven out of 87 seats in parliament. Not bad for our history. But while they did try to make some contributions offer their alternative solutions in Parliament. There was also some difficulty, we understand, with managing the local municipal issues. So the idea is really, would they be prepared to expand their influence and to really step up to the plate in terms of managing the local municipal issues if they were given the opportunity to extend, right? Extend their reach beyond just the 6, 7 seats that they had.
Okay. You talk about stability. It seems to have been a factor in the polls, and that's a message that the Prime Minister and PAP always drive at. What do you think was the concern of voters going into the election? Was it primarily economics, well-being? Because for a time there was a discussion that Singaporeans are becoming aspirational because at this point in its history, now that it's a first world country, it seems to have secured the basics, bread and butter issues. But apparently the results seem to indicate something else.
Well, it's very important. We have to take as a starting point Singapore as a very tiny global city-state. So we don't set the price for anything. We just have to, roll with the punches if something happens in the region, and worse if there is some kind of economic disruption. So Singaporeans are acutely aware of that. And remember, the general election was called on 9/11 of
Right.
2015, but
Yeah.
not 2001. But the backdrop was really about, the question of who can secure which party will provide that safe pair of hands to take you through an age that seems to be more uncertain than ever. I mean, post World War II development seemed relatively straightforward compared to what it's like today, where the economic fluctuations are really large, very
Right.
uncertain. Everybody's sort of so closely intertwined in terms of their economy. So I think Singaporeans are quite aware about that. But so the question is whether voters would be willing to admit more of an opposition voice in Parliament, and the extent to which that might undermine the PAP government's ability to provide security, safety, strong defense mechanisms on the economic and on the geopolitical side for a very uncertain future.
So you mentioned the economic aspects in the 2011 elections, and they say to an extent in this one, one of the key issues is really immigration. The concern of some Singaporeans that foreigners seem to be taking our jobs, that it's impacting on infrastructure and services. How did that figure into this current elections? And do you think we'll see a change in policy?
Well, you're right. And guess what? While immigration was a huge theme in 2011, the opposition parties reprised the theme in 2015.
Okay.
So it wasn't anywhere far off the radar. It was front and center of the campaigning. And really the question is, hey, what does it mean for Singaporeans to have that many foreign workers? They would suggest that the city is too congested, that it causes, costs to increase because we become more dense, that it changes our cultural landscape, and worse, that, foreigners could be taking jobs away from locals or depressing the wages at the low end.
Okay.
So over the last 4 years, I mean, what the government has done is to firstly tighten up its policies on admitting foreigners and also admitting immigrants. That's the first point. Then the second point is that the government's actually introduced many other measures to ensure that Singaporeans have a fair shot at every possible job vacancy before businesses will be allowed to hire foreigners. So we have something called the Fair Consideration Framework and a national jobs bank, where businesses have to actually advertise their vacancies, wait 14 days, prove that there was no appropriate Singapore worker to take that job before they can even get a license. And guess what? I mean, it won't be the case that you can keep doing that all the time. The Ministry actually of Manpower enforces this and checks if there are companies that keep having to go to the government to
Okay.
get that foreign worker.
Okay.
Yeah, so there have been significant moves on that front. So I think the extent to which that would matter to
Mm-hmm.
voters would depend on whether they knew that and whether they felt that the other policies that I mentioned about social safety nets
Mm-hmm.
and increased subsidies for the basics in life would have helped Singaporeans feel a bit more secure. I think coming up is really that the businesses are, screaming out for labor because in Singapore we've had this history since 1975 where we had far more job vacancies than we have people to take them up.
Right, right.
Yeah, so it will be a dampener on crazy rates of growth, but it does mean that now Singapore is recalibrating towards
Mm-hmm.
more inclusive, quality growth that's knowledge driven
Mm-hmm.
and is labor lean.
Mm-hmm. But the outcome of the elections, the PAP having such a majority in parliament, do you think there will be a change? If I were a foreign businessman or someone seeking to work in Singapore, would I expect a significant change in policy after the election?
Well, I think the election results gives us the best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Have a PAP that has a strong mandate so that they can continue to press on with the reforms that they have mentioned they will keep at, which is to strengthen social safety nets, strengthen Singaporeans' sense of security, but also press on with recalibrating the labor market. On the other side, I didn't mention just now, the government has a lot of help to businesses to move into more capital intensive, more knowledge intensive industries.
Okay.
So it helps on the other side of the equation as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But so we have a strong mandate for the PAP, but guess what? We also have six duly elected members of the opposition party, Workers' Party,
Mm-hmm.
taking seats in the House. And then we have a provision so that if there are less than 9 duly elected opposition members in parliament,
Mm-hmm.
you get to top it up to 9.
Okay,
So
you
in that
appoint.
case, yeah, in that case, the best losers, again from the Workers' Party,
Mm-hmm.
if you take up the 3 extra seats, you have a solid block of
Mm-hmm.
9 members of parliament from one party. And I
Okay.
can't imagine that with that solid block, they would not be able to improve on their record in terms of their performance in Parliament, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of their performance on other national platforms and giving policy views, their alternative views, but also with 9, with 6 duly elected, they still have now a second term to improve on what they do in the local municipal issues. I mean, they're a bit more experienced now. So I can't see their performance waning. I can
Okay.
only see their performance improving as long as they're not too depressed about the results.
For now, everyone seems to be surprised and trying to make sense of it for now. I wanted to ask you about age. Prior to the elections, during the 50th anniversary, there was a lot of discussion about a generation gap in Singapore. They say that the older generation seems to be more appreciative of the success of Singapore, of the work of the PAP, of founding leaders like the late Prime Minister Lee, and the younger generation is more demanding, more aspirational, they call it, more globally exposed and educated. But the results don't seem to show such a divide, and the Prime Minister pointed that out. What are your views on it?
Well, I don't know, Ai. I think we'll have to do the surveys to really find out which segments of the population sort of swung back to the
Mm-hmm.
PAP, whether these particular segments supported the PAP or the opposition. But I think, it's understandable that the older generations have actually seen, their lives improve from when we were really a swamp land in 1965
Yeah.
to what you see Singapore is today. So they've actually experienced the progress that the PAP sort of worked with Singaporeans to deliver.
Mm-hmm.
And naturally, the younger voters just ride on the fact that, their grandparents and parents have done well, that they
Right.
actually, start have a starting point that is so much higher
Mm-hmm.
than their parents or grandparents ever had. But you know what? In our surveys, we also noted that the young people are very happy, very enthusiastic, very supportive of the democratic ideal of listening to diverse voices, thinking afresh, tolerating diverse views. So they're the ones who will actually have to they'll take a fresh look at all the parties. They will take pride in the fact that they will remain they remain to be persuaded
Mm-hmm.
of the different parties' policy platforms, and also whether they have credible politicians to offer. So what the prime minister said at his post GE post uh, election conference
Mm-hmm.
is that if the young people hadn't also somewhat supported the PAP, you wouldn't have had this outcome. So people who are 21 to 29 years old comprised about 17% of
17, 1-7.
1/7 of the
Mm-hmm.
electorate. So there's no way that if they were all skeptical, they didn't know anything about the PAP, they didn't
Mm-hmm.
support it at all, that we would have had this result. If they all
Mm-hmm.
stood away and
Right.
only supported, say, the opposition parties, you wouldn't have had this result in this way. So that's
Mm-hmm.
what he was trying to say. And we'll have to do the studies to confirm that,
Okay.
in the days ahead.
All right. Speaking of the Prime Minister, he talks about putting in place his team, and he makes no qualms about the need to groom the next generation of leaders, and succession in Singapore has always been done long term. How do you
Yes.
see this playing out after the elections?
Well, I think I would just want to quote him. He said that he had a few individuals
Mm-hmm.
whom he would put out quickly into positions in government. In a way, is to quickly test them. Let them have the experience they need. Really prove themselves. The key thing is I think with the robust debates that we had, going into our 9/11, the general election, I don't think that the PAP for 1 minute would think that, it's now got this overwhelming mandate, doesn't have to bother about what people think or feel
Mm-hmm.
about them. In fact, the Prime Minister said in his post-general election conference that he recognized through the election that there were diverse voices
Mm-hmm.
waiting to be heard, that there were diverse views that should be recognized and engaged. So it's not a case of let's just go straight out and ramrod anything, through. So I think these new core of
Mm-hmm.
leaders will have to have enough time to be put out there, and there'll be two levels of assessment.
Okay.
First would be what their government peers and civil servants are saying in terms of their ability to contribute to policy formulation, to rigorous analysis of what the issues are. So
Mm-hmm.
that's internal to government. Then how they relate to the public at large. Do they understand what the views are? Understand sort of how the different segments of population view issues, and apply certain governance principles to their engagement with the public. So, and the people have to take to them. The people have to take to them. This is something that was mentioned the Prime Minister when his candidate lost a by-election,
Mm-hmm.
that people need time to warm up to his leaders and vice versa. So there's just no way that you can present a slate and these are the leaders. It's that age is long gone.
Okay. Is there any emerging contender to be the next Prime Minister of Singapore?
Oh, there's a whole bunch of names and a whole
Uh-huh.
bunch of young leaders, and I think they'll have to, as we said, they'll have to be assessed. They'll have to pull their own weight and
Mm-hmm.
really prove their mettle through the next few years. Because what it is that the PAP as a movement always believes that they must present leaders who represent the Zeitgeist of the time,
Mm-hmm.
represent the main segments of the population at the time. uh, so they have to keep in touch. They must have their finger on the pulse of the people who really matter,
Okay.
and that's the reason why we don't. They don't believe that a 70-year-old PM will cut it. Yeah,
Okay.
if the median age of the population is, let's say, for argument's sake, 40, There's
Right.
just no way, yeah. So they're trying to balance it up. But the national movement, they
Mm-hmm.
now have that many leaders, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
80, let's say 83 PAP MPs. So there's a portfolio,
Mm-hmm.
but the core of the fourth generation leadership has to be people that Singaporeans would broadly identify with.
Okay. So now looking at the political landscape in Singapore after this surprising election, what do you think about whether or not Singapore would remain a one-party system, or because for a time people are hoping it would be more pluralistic? As you said, there would be more voices. Is
Yeah.
there now is that a bit far off in the future of Singapore?
No, I think when you look at the Singapore political system, of course, it's changing from a one-party dominant state to one where there is a lot more citizen participation in the
Mm-hmm.
governance model. So citizens are speaking up, whether as citizens through and individuals through feedback channels from the
Mm-hmm.
ground or to ministries directly, or they're speaking up through our civil society organizations, and they're also participating and contributing to the opposition parties' activities.
Right.
And now, as I said, we certainly have the six duly elected opposition parliamentarians, the same as 2011,
Okay.
but now three more possibly from the same party.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a solid block. And then through the election, we actually saw, yeah, I mean, the field is getting clearer in terms of who's in the leading group and who's not.
Okay.
And there's a newly revived Singapore Democratic Party as well. So
Mm-hmm.
even though they didn't score so well in the election, in fact, they saw a small decline in their popular vote.
Okay.
There's certainly some politicians there who went down quite well
Mm-hmm.
with the electors, and they also have position papers on lots of policies.
Okay.
So my short answer to you is it would depend on how the opposition movement reads these results,
Okay.
whether they're really depressed about it and then go running home, or they find that there are certain opportunities that are now open to them,
Okay.
and they develop strategies to strengthen the movement and
Mm-hmm.
be very cognizant of what voters are looking for, what
Mm-hmm.
their concerns are, what type of politician, what type of political positions and policy uh, suggestions
Mm-hmm.
would really work for Singaporeans that is different from what the PAP can offer, and then build up over time. Yeah.
Okay. Finally, I wanted to ask you, we are observers outside of Singapore.
Uh-huh.
From the international perspective, we look into how the city-state conducted its elections. What do you think are lessons? What do you think are things that other countries, especially in Southeast Asia, emerging democracies in transition, can learn from Singapore's elections?
Well, that's quite a funny question because most times if you read, what democratic scholars write,
Right.
they'll never hold Singapore out as a best practice of any sort. And in fact, our opposition politicians here are always complaining that they don't get the heads up long enough in terms of
Right.
where election
Preparation.
boundaries are going to be drawn. Uh, in terms of when the election is going to be called. So these things are not best practice by any means from, what opposition politicians view in Singapore. But what is clear is that we definitely have a high level of contestation, and
Mm-hmm.
whether they make it or not, it exists, and they do pull eyeballs. And at the end of the day, of course, it's up to voters to decide. That's the first thing, high level of contestation, because political competition is very important, especially if we want the best ideas to prevail to
Mm-hmm.
take us forward. I think the second one is that it's clean.
Right.
The officials are extremely professional.
Mm-hmm.
Singapore is a very small country, so the scrutiny is very, very high, whether it's from
Mm-hmm.
official sources or from voters.
Okay.
And most importantly, the political parties themselves always try to put their polling agents at every stage of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, the elections department ensures that the polling agents are there at every stage of the process.
Okay.
This time around, there was one thing that was new. The elections department introduced something called a sample count. And it
Okay.
happens in lots of bigger democracies where a poll is done of the actual votes so that you have an early indication of how the votes went for each constituency.
Okay.
So this time around, it was introduced so that there would not be any sort of wild speculation on social media before the, before the actual results. So
Okay.
people's need for a quick indication is satiated. They're satisfied. They have something that's official
Right.
to carry them through the night before the results are introduced. Yeah, but I think overall, what we understand from voters in Singapore, which is different, is that voters do think long term, even though they think about their daily bread and butter issues. They do want to know what is the long term future of Singaporeans and their children and their children's children. So, firstly, they think long term.
Okay.
Secondly, they're very interested in fair play. So, they're not going to be indulging in anything that undermines that.
Okay.
And they will call it out as well. So fair play is really important. And then third, they actually don't really like political grandstanding. They like politicians who are quite rational, who make quite good points, who might be witty in calling out certain things rather than being brutal or bullying. They definitely don't like bullying. Or character assassination. Don't get personal. Just let's talk about the policy. So that's what voters were saying during the hustings.
Yes, talking about policy, so that seems pretty unique to Singapore, at least coming from the Philippine perspective. Thank you very much, Dr. Jillian Ko of the Institute of Policy Studies at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. I'm Ai Makaraig for Rappler Talk. Thank you for joining us.
Bye.